Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's study. We're going to continue looking at 1 Samuel chapter 14, but before we do, let's have a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so grateful for the time that we have again this morning. We invite your Spirit's presence as we open your word together. We are thankful, Lord, for the things that you have been showing us about ourselves. We ask, Lord, for your continued strength in our lives as we struggle in this world and the different trials that we have. We pray for one another. We pray for Kelly as he's planning to travel here in the next few days. We just pray that you can help him and give him safety. And we ask, Lord, that the things that we study, that we can understand them clearly and that they can affect our lives, that we can share your truth and the gospel to others. Be with us now, we pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so we were addressing yesterday this attack on the garrison by Jonathan and his armor bearer. And there was a question asked a couple of days ago regarding whether this attack was the same one that's mentioned in chapter 12? Chapter 11, but it's not, right? So we have Jonathan had done an initial attack against the Philistine garrison with the men that were with him and had a victory. And this created a situation where the Philistines are now going to come in force against Israel. And while this battle is sort of being set up, the Jonathan and his armor bearer, and Jonathan, I guess in particular, is going to be led by God to have this encounter with some of the Philistines at the garrison. And this is going to end up being a victory designed by God. Now, when we're looking at these stories, so we know that we're going to be putting these on a line. Right now, we don't have them drawn out on a line. We should have something in our mind regarding this. And where we have placed this story is that this has to do with that this Philistine garrison represents the teachings or the movement or something connected with Parminder and Tess, what we call sometimes the Omega, as opposed to the Alpha of the movement, which is FFA, for Jeff's message. So we can say that there is this initial situation. However we look at it, we're going to say that the message of Jonathan has to do with the message of chronology that is going to bring this assault against Parminder and his movement. And initially where I placed this, and remember, this is just me looking at it. I know there's some people say it makes sense, but it doesn't mean that this is the best way to interpret it. But we would have what happened in relation to that history from 2018 up to 2019, where this message of the chronology was given first to affirm November 9th, 2019 as a date, but not for the same reasons that Parminder and Tess had established that date. So they were doing time setting based on dispensationalism, and God gave us something in the movement, which was correct biblical chronology based upon the past, that showed that there was going to be a separation in the movement with November 9th. And then we're going to have that separation develop from all through that history. It's going to be the rebellion of Baal Peor as a symbol on August 29th in Germany. And then we're going to have September 7th. That's when Jeff is going to do his last sermon at Lambert Church before they close down the church. And in that sermon, we have, it's part of that Baal Peor sort of recognition. That's Moses recognizing what's happening. And then we have November 9th, and November 9th, we now have July 18th being this date in contrast to November 9th, that is, these two different tests being set up. We parallel that with Elijah on Mount Carmel, with the prophets of Baal. And then we have this situation. So we would have to say, is this skirmish that happens, where would we place it? So it's a second attack on the garrison. Would that be what's happened since July 18th? Would we place that, December 6th, 2020, or events afterwards, right? So we did this all with the book of Judges as we went through each of the stories of the judges and we set them on a line. And we haven't really done much putting any of this on a line yet, just because this is our first pass over these things. Any thoughts on that so far?
Yeah, when I asked that question the other day, I hadn't read verse 11, which tells you that it was a different battle.
Yeah. Okay. But but I'm just, making that clarification there. Any other thoughts on this so far? Do we seem like that sort of makes sense, what we're looking at here? Okay. Now we're going to read some of the Spirit of Prophecy quotes that we passed by yesterday. So we read this here. But the Lord saw in Jonathan a man of pure integrity, one to whom he could draw nigh, and upon whose heart he could move. Now it came to pass upon a day that Jonathan the son of Saul said unto the young man that bare his armor, Come and let us go over to the Philistines' garrison, that is on the other side. But he told not his father, and Saul tarried in the uttermost part of Gibeah, under a pomegranate tree which is in Migron, and the people which were with him were about 600 men. And Jonathan said, so this is just basically going to be going through these verses. All right, here was a man who put the Lord first. Right, so there isn't a lot that she's saying here that's not in the verses that we read. Now we looked at this pomegranate tree, and we said that this is actually probably the rock of Rimmon. Rimmon is pomegranate, but it's not likely that that they're tearing under a pomegranate tree, but that they're actually tearing under the rock of Rimmon, which is mentioned in the book of Joshua. It's Judges, I can't remember, it's chapter 20 somewhere. So what we see here is that Jonathan is being led by God in this situation. So we have within this movement questions that came up after July 18th about whether God was leading us or not. And if we're going to say that Saul represents FFA, especially in connection, and we're going to look at the rationale as well, that would be placed. What was the sin of Saul, and how would that parallel what happened in the movement? And how do we see, God leading the movement? How do we see, God was leading Saul at first. And any thoughts on that? I know it's a pretty broad question. Okay, let's read this here, this paragraph. Both of them discovered themselves unto the garrison of the Philistines. And the Philistines said, Behold, the Hebrews come forth out of the holes that they had hid themselves, where they had hidden themselves. And the men of the garrison answered Jonathan and his armor bearer, and said, Come up to us, and we will show you a thing. And Jonathan said unto his armor bearer, Come up after me, for the Lord hath delivered them into the hands of Israel. Here we have an evidence that the enemy knew the weakness of the armies of Israel, and of their hiding in the holes and the secret places. And they taunted them and mocked them for their cowardice. So what would we find as a parallel in these verses, 11 and 12, to what has happened in the movement? Any thoughts on how we can do that?
The taunting and the mocking that happened after July 18th.
Okay, so we got the mocking that happens, right? So we know mocking is one of the waymarks. And remember, there is mocking in the Millerite history as well. There's mocking in lots of histories. Okay, now what about them discovering themselves, that is, revealing themselves to the garrison of the Philistines? Does that have any like prophetic significance? Is there some way that we can understand that as a symbol? Dwight, you got some ideas on that?
No,
Now, when we talk about the hiding and the secret places, now we know that Parminder's movement was doing things in secret. Now, this is different, correct?
I'd say that's possible.
Okay. So, what could this hiding in the holes and the secret places represent? Because, we're going to say with this aspect of the movement, dealing with biblical chronology and symbolic use of numbers,
That they didn't understand the message and that they didn't wish to present the message.
right? Okay. Yeah. So when we look at what happened in Germany, so we got Odilio, Stephen, and John Mark being called before a tribunal to recant of their belief in July 18th, which was kind of a surprise to Stephen and Odilio that this was happening. We're going to have Odilio, he's going to go out in the woods to pray prior to going to that meeting. And what's going to happen with Odilio when he goes out to pray?
He mentioned he saw a birdhouse with 187 on it.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
he signed from the.
Yeah. And so we have a birdhouse, and he takes a picture of it. It has the number 187 on it, which he took as a sign from God. Now, what does the birdhouse represent? Why is it a birdhouse? I know this is kind of obscure sort of thing, but what do birds do in birdhouses? What are they doing?
Well,
Build
they
nests.
nested there. But isn't that
Okay,
in contrast to Revelation 18, where it speaks about a cage full of evil birds?
Yeah.
Evil
But aren't-
demons.
Yeah. So don't birds kind of hide in the holes and the secret places? That's where they build their nests.
I would say they build nests and lay eggs.
Yeah. And they're hiding in the holes, right? Birdhouses have holes in them, right? And secret places. So here, this is not about the sort of clandestine or clandestine, however you say the word, plans and machinations of Parminder in trying to take over the school of prophets, all kinds of deceptions. Here, it's just that we have a message, an understanding that is a precious message that has been hidden in God's word, right? We have, and we're discovering it. That is, we're taking this message and we're revealing it to the movement. There's not some sort of hidden agenda. It's just simply being open about the things that we're finding. Now, what about the weakness? What is the weakness that Parminder's movement is seeking to exploit, that they're using? If that makes sense as a question.
A tendency to people to be easily flattered.
Okay.
Gullibility.
Okay, more that. Well, I would say basically, because the weakness here we say of the armies of Israel. Yeah. So they're going to. So part of it. Okay, if we look at what Parminder is doing, so if we kind of go back and we have, going back way to 2012, right? So in 2012, Parminder is going to, in a clandestine way, present that there's going to be a Sunday law in 2014. He has these secret Bible studies where people are not to share what is being said in the Bible studies, but it leaks out anyway, and the video leaks out of this Bible study that they had. And Jeff hears of it. I hear of it too. I'm, not really connected with Jeff or anything. I'm in Canada. I'm not really talking to Jeff or anything, but Tabo was living with me at the time, and Tabo was part of this secret group, an email group, which I believe Terry Lambert was a part of. That's what I've heard. I don't know specifically if she was that connected way back then in 2012, but seems at some point she's connected with Parminder's group. So Jeff then says, well, this is heresy, it's fanaticism, we can't time set. And so, we think that's kind of the end of Parminder, but Parminder rises up again in 2015. He's going to be at the camp meeting in Alberta, and Tabo, who's friends with Parminder's, he's promoting Parminder. And Parminder appears to be teaching things that are correct, as far as I can see at that time. Later on, he says that was all just posturing, everything that he was doing. He had sort of an ulterior motive, that if he had showed people what his true views were, they would never have made him the head of the movement, as Jeff did in 2019. So Parminder in 2016, him, Tabo, and the other guy, they're going to be made elders. They're going to be ordained as elders, and they still what they're doing is still all hidden, right? The Parminder gets more and more power. They try and want to form a new organization, new denomination, all these different ideas. Okay, so we have, during that time, I'm studying chronology. No idea about really what's going on, what Parminder's plans are. But everything that's unfolding to me is in direct response to what Parminder is doing. So to me, that's God showing me these things, so that when it comes to time setting coming back into the movement on June 9th, 2019, that God at that time is showing me the Week of Christ study, which I'm then going to present in August in Alberta, then going to present that in 2018. And then again at the School of the Prophets in September of 2018. So we're now going to have this, and there's lots of other stuff going on all through this history. So when we get to this prediction and it's June 9th, 2018, that we have this, I think I said 2018, that we have time setting come into the movement. So then when on October 13th, 126 days later, when I'm at Lambert Church and I'm doing that measurement of the 391 and a half days, that confirms this date that 10 days before Tess has proclaimed as November 9th, 2019. Everything's falling into place. That is, we have, in a sense, I'm going to say that there's this battle. We would put this as the battle against the Philistine garrison that Jonathan does in earlier here, which I always forget which chapter that is. So that's going to be in, so chapter 13, right? Jonathan's going to come in chapter 13, okay, that he's going to have that battle, that first battle against the Philistine garrison. And so we would put that in that history. So if we're going to take this where he discovers himself, we would have to put this in connection with November 9th or something, possibly, right? That kind of makes sense. So we would say that first battle in chapter 13 is the one that sort of starts this battle. But this here, discovering themselves, it must be something else. So we're saying that it's going to happen in connection with the mocking. So maybe it's something to do with July 18, or that history, that 770 days from November 9th to December 25th, 2021. Is this mocking happening? Because we're going to look at what Parminder is doing, not particularly the movement, but this teaching, right? That is, it's a Philistine way of study that still continues in the movement even after July 18th. Is it where we have the conflict with the American and Canadian groups, which is where a lot of the mocking happens towards biblical chronology? Is it later on in 2023, we had a lot of mocking going on in 2023. Okay, so
It could be ongoing. I mean, it is ongoing. So why isn't that verse mentioning that this conflict is continuing? Because actually, it's not people, it's spirits. It's the battle
yes,
for the mind and the heart.
yeah,
And it's constant. I mean, I just had a post on Facebook. That's why I'm late about that. Because I'm being prevented from reposting something. So I just commented on it and I got into this speech or article about spiritual warfare. I mean, we're engaged in it constantly. Every time I go to this Bible study or a local Bible study, which is a mixed one, there's such a spiritual conflict there that most people are not aware of it. But I am aware of it because I'm watching the interchanges, listening to them between these people. And man, they really need to be enlightened, as do all of us. We
okay,
need to be aware. There are demons and unfallen angels listening in and guiding us either to right or to wrong, to further truth or to falsehood and backsliding. We need to be constantly on guard. I mean, I'm seeing this more and more and more.
okay. Okay, now it says here, and Jonathan climbed upon his hands and his feet, and his armor bearer after him, and they fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer slew after him. So we got Jonathan and his armor bearer. Now we know, of course, that the word hands is 3027, the Hebrew number, which we've connected to March 27th as a symbol. Feet is 7272. So it's a doubling number. And then we have this armor bearer. The word for armor bearer in Hebrew is Keli, like Kelly, right? So that's interesting. So that's part of it. And then the other one is Nasa, to lift, right? So you got an armor bearer is to lift the armor, right? That's literally what it is. Okay. So we have something that's lifting the armor. The armor itself is something that's prepared, that is an apparatus, an implement, a utensil, a vessel, a weapon, armor, artillery, right? Lots of different things that it could be. So something that's prepared and it's going to be lifted. NASA. You could say, well, that's NASA, North Americans, whatever NASA stands for. Can't remember what it stands for, which means to lift.
National Aeronautics and Space Administration.
That's it. Yeah, National Aeronautics and Space Administration. So NASA, which some people try to say means deceive, but I haven't figured that how people get that from NASA. But anyway, and then so what does it mean that he climbs upon his hands and his feet? Now, of course, this is something I've done lots of times, climbing mountains. It's called scrambling. Did some this last summer.
I've done it too. It's always humbling, but it's exhilarating. Yeah, I'm thinking of Daniel when he was on his hands and feet and Gabriel had to lift him up.
Okay. So the armor bearer here, who would the armor bearer be? Or what would it be? So we're saying Jonathan is this message dealing with the chronology, the understanding of the symbolic use of numbers. It's climbing upon its hands and its feet. So it's in a position that we see Daniel in Daniel chapter 10.
I'm thinking that you have the armor bearer in Jonathan. So that would be doubling. So like a second angel's message. And then they're joined later with the other company. So I was just thinking like in 1844, you have the second angel comes down, and then it's with the midnight cry, there's a multitude of angels.
Okay.
So maybe a connection there. But I just remember also in Germany that with the controversy that was going on, July 18 and Perminder, there was an email exchange going on between Kelly and Perminder. And I think Kelly was kind of, well, seemed to me at the time, going with Perminder's side of things anyway at that time.
Okay.
Whether he was or not, I'm not too sure whether he was just placating him or whatever, but certainly it's Kelly was involved with emails with Perminder in connection with July 18.
Okay, Kelly, do you remember any of that?
Oh, no, I do not. I don't know. I have every email I've probably ever sent, so I could take a look. But yeah, what year was that again?
Well, that's in August of 2019, at the end of August. So you don't
Okay,
remember
yeah,
any exchange with Parminder? So was Parminder telling you about the email exchange, Stephen, or how was that? How do you know about it?
or which Kelly do you mean? You mean Kelly Ross?
Well, you're the only
Yes,
Kelly I know.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know. I was pretty much in the dark. I was just hearing odd things coming out of Germany until I remember hearing that the meeting kind of broke up and whatchamacallit, what's her face? Jess Otter. Bronwyn, I just remember hearing that the meeting broke up and Bronwyn left and things went sideways, and I was just waiting to hear what was going on. I don't remember any emails.
Yeah. So, Stephen, was this
And
just?
what were the emails supposed to be about?
Yeah, Stephen, can you tell us
Like,
how you heard about the emails and what was being said about them? Was it just a way of attacking July 18th that was being misused by, Tabo and Parminder or something?
Yeah, and I'll try to find the emails.
Okay.
Just give me continue talking and I'll see if I can find it.
So what was the idea then? That I was against July 18th?
That's what it
And I
seemed.
was telling Parminder that? Is that the idea?
Well, I think it's certainly Perminder seemed to be convincing you that whatever July 18 was wrong or not to bother with it. I think that was what was going on.
Yeah, no, he might have said that, but yeah, I've never doubted it. Actually, I mean, there's just too many things, witnesses since then, and even up until just recently. For me, it's I mean, I put my money where my mouth was, and I never regretted it. And no, that's interesting. I'll take a look too, because I saw Parminder as kind of a car salesman myself, like trying to sell some bad goods. He tried to, like, I remember giving him a ride to the airport from one of the camp meetings we had, and sharing with me some of his life. And then the next time I saw him, I think it was a year later, maybe in Arkansas, and he approached me like we were old friends. And I remember just kind of feeling awkward. And he got the idea pretty quick that I wasn't going to be one of his followers. I mean, I'm not a follower, so that's interesting that you get that idea. Yeah.
Yeah. I just remember I don't have any information in my own emails. I don't know how I heard about it. But it's certainly in my mind, my memory, that there was some email exchange going on between yourself and Perminder around the 20th, 27th of August.
Yeah. Well, Kelly, you were having like communication with Tabo as well, right? Right, Kelly?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I would
So
go
it could
to
be.
they were having these meetings once a month or something. I'd always go to if I could.
So, the one thing about Tabo that I noticed is whenever there was money involved coming from people, that person was treated quite differently than somebody that wasn't given. But that's,
Oh, that explains why he and I didn't have a face-off then. Thank you for telling me that. Explains a lot.
I noticed that.
Well,
Just for a while,
you didn't act
for a
no
while-
difference to me.
yeah, well, for a while I was giving him money and he was treating me nicely. But then I stopped giving him money and I was giving money to Jeff.
Well, I was giving it to Jeff too, so I figured if
Well,
you,
you're American, so the Americans were supposed to give it to Jeff according to Tabo, and the Canadians were supposed to give it to Tabo. But anyway, the money does strange things with people. But as far as, I mean, it's kind of interesting.
first of all, I wasn't giving my money. I was giving God's tithe and offering.
Yeah, but you understand what I'm saying. That
Yeah.
there are people that when they're receiving money, it makes them treat people differently than they would if the person wasn't giving the money. But so, as far as Jonathan climbing up on his hands and his feet, I mean, this to me is illustrating the humility of this message, right? But he's also discovering himself. That is, there is not something hidden, even though they've been hiding. They have this message that's hidden. They're actually revealing themselves. There is not some hidden agenda with the chronology, as there was with Parminder's movement, right? And I would say that it's around that time when July 18th becomes prominent that it discovers itself, that is, it reveals itself and then is attacked by Parminder's movement. But it's going to be victorious, right? That is, July 18th is going to be taken up by Saul, by FFA, and promoted, right? So that battle there is won. So maybe that's kind of a little sketchy, but that's sort of how I see what happens in that situation. So we go back to Germany. We have that confrontation with July 18th, and now we see when we get through September 7th and then get to November 9th, July 18th becomes the message for the movement, right? And that message, the purpose of it was to test our characters and to prepare us, right? To show us our sins. So we got here, Kelly just sent us August 26, 2019 email, part 1. So this email's from who? From Parminder? Kelly? Yeah, so Parminder. Okay, so it says, I repudiate the claim that you make that I somehow agree with Brother Theodore's July 18, 2020 study. That class to which you refer seemed like an attempt by the questioner to get me to agree with what Theodore teaches. I do not. Watch over it again. The brother, when pressed to answer if he believed that we could know such information, was vague in his response because he knew it was not in agreement with what we teach. To suggest that because I agree with 19, 20, 21, and also that I have demonstrated that August 11th, 1840 would be fulfilled between 2019 and 2021 is some kind of second witness to his study is something I reject. The track of truth lies close to the track of error. People who follow him here in Europe have gone so far, have become so emboldened in their fanaticism that they actually believe that they are messengers sent from God to give us this truth and are prophesying, predicting that the leadership must accept their message or be lost. So that must be Stephen and Odilio, right? And John Mark. Stephen, do you think that's who he's referring to? Or maybe just Odilio? Or?
Yeah, probably us. I can't really, because we were called false prophets. So he had emailed Jeff as well around that time, saying there was false prophets in the camp.
Okay. Yeah, it's funny how people represent things, eh? There will not be an attack on U.S. soil by Islam on that date. It is a false prophecy based upon false methodology. So we could see the same thing being said by people opposing William Miller. Jesus is not going to come back in 1843 or 1844. It's a false doctrine. He says, please do not attach my name to this false study in an attempt to bolster it and give it some credibility. As a brother whom I consider a friend, I would admonish you to steer clear of such distractions and focus on the true midnight cry. And that's from Parminder. And then you sent an email to Cabo, right? Says, I thought this was interesting. Jeff encourages us to study Theodore's presentation on July 18, 2020. And so this is, Parminder says he does not reject 2020 recorded in Wales last month. So that was something that you sent the Tabo. And so then that's what Parminder's responding to, I guess, right? In his email. Okay, so kind of interesting. Yeah, so, I mean, we know that Parminder was correct. The attack did not occur. Now, back then, Parminder was also making predictions regarding November 9th, 2019. Did his predictions come true? Obviously not, right? But we also had other witnesses. So when it came to November 9th, 2019, my prediction for November 9th was that it was gonna cause a division in the movement. So actually, I didn't think that we were going to have the events that Parminder and Tess were predicting for November 9th, right? So, I mean, you could say that we're either both wrong or we're both right, however you wanted to look at it. But we could see that God was leading in the July 18, 2020 prediction, just like the Millerites had for October 22nd, 1844. So we can see that July 18th wins out in this case, even though, a person could argue it's a failed prediction as well. Now we have, and that first slaughter, which Jonathan and his armor bearer made, was about 20 men within, as it were, an half acre of land, which a yoke of oxen might plow, or half a furrow of an acre of land. And they have a quote from Judges 7:21. That's interesting. So this is the King James translators giving this reference. Is that correct, Dwight?
Correct.
And so they refer to this Judges 7:21, and that's of course July 21 as a symbol, right? Midnight. So it's going to refer to this as it were a half acre of land. Now, of course, acre is not a Hebrew measurement. It's a ma'ana, that is a furrow, and chetzi, a half or the middle, right? So what do we have here? If we have a furrow is a line, and what is the halfway? If you have a line and you have halfway in a line, we have our line, what do we mark as halfway? In Millerite history, where is midway?
Midpoint or midnight.
Yeah, it's July 21st, isn't it? So that's kind of interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. So what we can say about this is that this first slaughter is marking midnight in some line. Okay? Does that make sense? Now people have been asking me, some people, Spanish speaking people, regarding the lines, right? And how because they're sort of listening to what Jeff is saying presently, and they obviously, because of the language barrier, they haven't looked at the study that we have done over the last four years or more. And so they don't quite understand the lines. Now we know that we can look at every waymark in a line, we zoom in and we can see another reform line, and we can zoom into the waymarks on that reform line. So we have a fractalization of these reform lines. And so we always need to know what line we're looking at. So we understand that 9/11 as an arrival of the second angel's message, that our whole movement is a zoom into that waymark. And yet we have within that line, we have waymarks that we zoom into. And so in connection with July 18, if we're going to have this event, as being midnight, we would just say, well, this is November 9th, right? November 9th becomes midnight, and July 18th becomes the midnight cry. That makes sense to people? That's originally how we sort of looked at it in that line. Now we also have ways in which we can look at November 9th as the arrival of the second angel's message itself, right? Which is not, of course, midnight, right? But it depends which magnification we're looking at. So we can place this, I think, as November 9th. We have this symbol here. Now, what about the 20 men? What's the significance of the 20? We've already done this before. We had 20 months and 20 years, and people remember back when we were doing the Book of Judges?
Yeah, I recall mention of that. I know Samson was a judge for 20 years, but I don't remember all the significance of the 20 years and the 20 months.
Okay, well, we had connected it to the August 29th, September 7th situation in different ways. So I don't know if I want to go through all the detail of that, but let me see if I can just find it here quickly. We had it.
20 times 30 would be 600, and there is mention of Saul having 600 men. Any connection there?
No. Well, I'm not making a connection there. I'm just dealing with this period of 20 years and a period of 20 months that we had, and I can't find the chart. I'm gonna have to look at it later. But it's something that connects 9/11 to, so we connect 9/11 to September 7th and August 29th. I think it's, trying to remember how that worked. And then we also had the 20 months, and that connected September 23rd to that, September 23rd, 2017 to 2019. Trying to remember exactly how we did that. I know I have a chart of it. I just can't find it through all these charts. When I search it out, see 20 months. Okay, there's lots of different 20-month things. Yeah, I can't find it at this point.
When you do, you can just post it and we'll look at it again, because I know I really need a refresh.
Yeah, if I look up 20 years. Okay, yeah, I can't find it yet. Okay, so they have this half a furrow of an acre of land, or half of a furrow. I don't know why they have acre of land here. I'm just going to look at the Hebrew here a little bit more closely. Okay, so in Hebrew, when we look at this verse face. Okay, so they killed 20 men. Now it says within, as it were, a half an acre of land. So that is in this space in which they do it. Now it has half or middle, 2677. That is the midst or the middle, right? So literally, or two parts, right? So the midst, so half or middle. Okay, and then it's
Love a kayak.
what did you say, Angela? I didn't hear it.
I just said, so that would be the middle of a chiasm, but which
Yes.
chiasm, which time span are we talking about?
Yeah, well, so it's midnight. Well, whatever, it's a symbol for midnight. That's why I'm saying, we used midnight as November 9th, 2019, and the midnight cry is July 18th. That's one way in which we looked at those lines, right? Then we have, so in the middle of a row or a furrow, okay, a furrow that a yoke or team of oxen in a field. So, I mean, yeah, it's kind of here. Just trying to look at some of these other words. So armor bearers, because they say here, within, as it were, like that's just not in the Hebrew. That's just them within. There's no within that I can see. Yeah, so I don't see anything about within. And it was that they struck the first time, that is Jonathan and his armor bearer, 20 men, in the middle of a furrow that was plowed in the field. That's what it says. So nothing about oxen, nothing about acre, nothing about within, right? So what they've done is they've tried to make it make sense of how they understand it when they translate it. So so it's not a word for word translation in this instant. Now you can see, of course, they've in the King James, they put which and of oxen might plow, they put those in italics, showing they're not there. But sometimes there's other words that aren't there, and they just put them there because they think they're grammatically necessary, sort of implied. But I don't see that in any of the forms of the words that would give it within, as it were, a half a furrow of an acre of land. It's just, it appears that they slew 20 men in the middle of a furrow in a field, not as it were, right? So it doesn't say it figuratively, though it may be figurative, but it doesn't literally say it's figurative. It just literally says it's the middle of a furrow, that's where these 20 men were slain. So we'd have to have 20 men in the middle of a furrow, right? Or a line, right? So this is the midpoint of some line. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So we can say that the figurative or maybe literal, we don't know, 20 false priests were slain at November 9th, 19.
And we have the doubling of the verse 14:14, which itself is a doubling of 7, so we have the July 21 symbol there that the translators gave us. So we have lots of symbols here that show that this is a symbol for midway. Okay, so regarding this verse 13 and 14 on what it says, Jonathan and his, or no, this is actually, what is this? Letter 16, 1897. So she quotes those two verses. Then she says, Jonathan and his armor bearer had asked a sign of the Lord, and the challenge had come, the sign was given. These two men placed their hope in God and went forward, but they had hard climbing to do to reach the spot. They climbed up on their hands and upon their feet, Jonathan saying at every step, the Lord hath delivered them into the hand of Israel. This is no easy passage for brave adventurers. The top of the precipice was encamped with Philistines. The two camps were in sight of each other, but up the steep sides of the rocky eminence, Jonathan and his armor-bearer ventured, using hands and feet in their climb. To outward appearance, this adventure seemed rash and contrary to all military rules. But the Lord had moved upon these men, and Jonathan went forward, saying at each step, it may be that the Lord will work for us. These two men evidenced that they were moving under the influence and command of a higher than human general. The action of Jonathan was not done in human rashness. He depended not on what they could do themselves, or what they could themselves do. He was an instrument that God used in behalf of the people of Israel. They made their plans and rested the cause in the hands of God. If the armies of the Philistines recognize them and challenge them, they will advance. If they say, come, then we will go forward. This was their sign, and the angels of the Lord prospered. So as we said last week, I looked at this sign that I had given in regard to this situation with Parminder and Jeff and this dispute over July 18. I can say that if we applied this to July 18 and what I was doing, this would describe it. That everything was left in God's hands, right? It wasn't, there was no rashness. Now, it seemed rash, maybe to people, right? Because it wasn't in accordance with the plans and the way that the movement wanted to do things. It was against the rules, so to speak. But we can say that with Odilio and Stephen and myself and John Mark in dealing with July 18th, and especially on my part, as far as just leaving it in the Lord's hand and it being a sign, whichever side was going to take up July 18th, that was who I was going to side with. That is, I understood the complexity of the situation. And so some people may say, well, that was sort of not wise, right? Like, what if Parminder had taken up July 18th? But it wasn't a matter of what if, it's a matter of God leading, right? So obviously I was already leaning towards the side of Jeff in the sense that there's lots of things I was doubtful about with Parminder, but I allowed that decision to be made by God, not by me, right? If July 18th was going to be presented, it was going to be that God had taken it up. Right? Now we can see how this is typical, this stuff, what's happening in the movement, with what's going to happen in the future. So our understanding is that we need to trust in God, that he's going to accomplish the work that he says he's going to do. We are not to be like Saul, right? However, we're going to look at Saul and see what he does, because Saul is going to make a rash vow. Right? So there's a contrast between Jonathan and Saul that's clearly shown here. Right? And so we can see that our movement's going to be illustrating this story as well. But this story is typical of something that's still going to happen in the future. Okay? Does that make sense? It would have been an easy matter for the Philistines to kill these two brave, daring men, but it did not enter into their minds that these two solitary men had come with any intent of hostility. They were regarded as deserters. They were therefore permitted to come without any harm. The wondering men above were looking on, too surprised to gather in the possible object. And they fell before Jonathan and his armor-bearer, slew after him. And that first slaughter which Jonathan and his armor-bearer made was about 20 men, within as it were an acre of land, which a yoke of oxen might plow. So, any thoughts on this then, and what we're saying and how this fits in?
Philistines had not expected that Jonathan and his armor-bearer had asked guidance from the Almighty. Neither had they anticipated that God was directing their every step.
Okay.
So they became very self-reliant.
Yeah, so we can see this in the movement.
Yes.
Like that was the thing that really puzzled me in regard to all the stuff that was happening, especially in 2019 when Tess was there and Tyler at the camp meeting in Alberta, and even stuff that happened earlier, even stuff back in 2017. There just wasn't this consideration. It was lots of politics. Okay, let's just say it simply as that. Lots of politics was going on. Lots of things that were hidden and secretive, lots of maneuvering and planning, and it definitely, there didn't seem to be a spirit of openness, of willingness to look for God's leading from any direction, which I had encountered when I first came into the movement in 2010. It's quite different, especially in regard to Jeff. So this spirit kind of had taken over the movement by 2019 particularly. But people don't often consider that they may be fighting against God. It's so important. Like even what's happened with Jeff last year when he started, publishing again. You need to take the time to prayerfully and carefully consider his articles, right? You have to be open that God can be leading in different directions.
Correct.
And we can't, with presumption, make decisions. We have to trust that God knows all, that we don't know anything, and carefully examine whatever information comes our way. And that's just something that wasn't being done then. There was not an open study about things. It wasn't even wanting to be considered. They're going in a direction, as Parminder sort of says, we don't support what they're doing. It's a wrong methodology. Do you think Parminder had any understanding of July 18, 2020 and how it was arrived at? I guarantee he had no understanding of it, right? And one of the reasons I know is because I had presented it to Tabo, and Tabo definitely did not understand it and continued to misrepresent what I was presenting. So all Parminder would have known is what Tabo told him. And Tabo kept suggesting that what I was doing was not line upon line, which it was exactly line upon line. Like it was so line upon line, it was a woven tapestry line upon line, type of line upon line. But he just didn't want to accept it. because he had other motives for why he was doing what he was doing. And so just the idea that anyone would be listening to anything I was saying to him was a threat, right? So without going into a lot of detail. So that's what Parminder would know about. Now, Stephen, on your part, do you know how much Parminder would have looked at some of the basic arguments regarding July 18th, like Ezekiel and Revelation 9 and the 26th day of the 4th month and the 10th day of the 5th month? Do you know how much he would have looked at it?
It was basically presented to him by Adelio in Wales over the space of maybe between 1 and 2 hours.
Okay. So now Adelio's understanding, so Adelio's understanding generally would tend to deal with a lot of the symbols, right? Because if you look at Adelio's paper on July 18th, the one thing that I would say I didn't like about the paper is it just never gave the main arguments for July 18th, right? So Adelio tended to deal with a lot of the symbolic use of numbers more as support for July 18th rather than the main argument. Would you agree with me on that, Stephen?
He would have emphasized a lot of the symbolism, I think, yes.
Yeah.
Um,
And I never saw in his presentation how we arrived at July 18th in the first place, right? So that wasn't part of his presentations. And when you and Adelio presented at the School of the Prophets back in 2019, prior to November 9th, before I got there, I mean, that was mainly, the presentations you and him were doing had to do with a lot of the symbols that supported July 18th, but not really the main way in which we got to July 18th, because one is you would assume that people had seen those studies and they would know that. So it was more the tertiary support, maybe even secondary support for July 18th. So the thing that I would say is that Parminder didn't understand, but I don't think he actually wanted to understand what July 18th was about. It was just a threat to their plans. Now, he did know about the November 9th because, I presented it with him there and the support, but since Tess rejected it, he had to reject it as well. So I'm just reading some of the comments there in Angela made in the chat. Yeah, so Angela brings up this point. She says, Theodore, you said the Philistines, the Omega group, attacked Jonathan, Adelio, Stephen, John Mark in Germany, but Jonathan and the armor bearer were on the offensive, and the Philistines were slaughtered by them. This is obviously only a spiritual victory, and the opposers have had no real advantage. They have only carnal weaponry. So the way that I look at it too is that's when they're going to be to discover themselves. That is, in that history, this message of July 18th is showing itself to the movement. This is where the sign is being presented. And so that represents that period from Germany all the way to November 9th. So the victory is won at November 9th. And we're saying that November 9th is the midway. That's where the 20 are slaughtered, right? So we'd have to, and for some reason, the way that I wrote this out, I'm not sure, I can't search it in my charts because I don't have 20 months ever or 20 years ever written out in that way. So I might have written it some other way. Might have just written, I don't know how I did that. Anyway, I'll have to find this for tomorrow. So that's the way I look at it, is there's this sign, and that sign is going to be revealed in that history. Parminder's rejection of July 18th leads to, what's going to happen as far as this message being accepted by the movement. So that's one way we could look at it. Whether this is, the best way, but there's a lot of things that point to this as the symbol. There was a trembling in the host, in the field, and among the people. The garrison and the spoilers, they also trembled, and the earth quaked. So it was a very great trembling. And the watchmen of Saul in Gibeah of Benjamin looked, and behold, the multitude melted away, and they went on beating down one another. So, just reading this alternate translation, trembling of God. So, I'm not sure why they translate it as a trembling of God or a very great trembling. What's the difference? So, what is this trembling? Yeah, so trembling of God makes more sense because the word God is there. It's the trembling of God, that's correct. So I'm not sure why they say a great trembling. The Hebrew says a trembling of God. So this is definitely of God. Was this movement of God? Was July 18th of God? Is one of the questions that was often asked. And we say that it was.
Well, it's no different than looking at the situation with Jonathan and his armor bearer. Was that of God?
Yeah. Okay.
We have to know that demon-inspired, demon-possessed people and demons themselves are terrified of God's angels. And when God's angels, even one of God's angels, is with us, the enemy trembles and flees. I mean, when I am demonically attacked and I'm really aware of it, I just call on Jesus to help, and that demon scurries out so fast before I can take the next breath sometimes. We need to be aware of the power that is available to us, especially in these last days.
Yeah. And then we can see how they turn on one another. They went on beating down one another, right? I think that's the idea. So the multitude is in confusion and they're fighting amongst themselves. And that happened definitely within the movement.
Ellen White wrote that the demons are never at peace with one another except when they're attacking us. So we need not have any fear of them.
Yeah. So letter 16, 1897 again. This daring work sent a panic throughout the camp. There lay the dead bodies of 20 men. To their sight, there seemed hundreds of men before them prepared for warfare. Who was it that was upon the ground to work with these two men? It was the armies of heaven. There was trembling in the host, in the field, and among all the people. And the garrison and the spoilers, they also trembled, and the earthquake. So it was a very great trembling, or as we know, it was the trembling of God. The armies of heaven were revealed to the opposing host of the Philistines. And the watchmen of Saul in Gibeah looked, and behold, the multitude melted away, and they went on beating down another. Okay, so then said Saul unto the people that were with him, number now, and see who is gone from us. And when they had numbered, behold, Jonathan and his armor bearer were not there. So what is this numbering that's going on here? Was there any numbering that went on?
Are they investigating?
Well, they're investigating, but the word that's used here, is not particularly in Hebrew. It's
Saul
not
had
really
counted 600 men among his forces.
Yeah. So in the Hebrew, the word number is not really number, right? So it's just in the King James, they chose the word number. But the word pakad means to visit, by analogy to oversee, muster, charge, care for. So the idea was they're going to basically muster, bring together the people. So only in the King James is it number, right? It's not really literally number in the Hebrew. But we can still ask the question, though, could we apply the numbering that goes on in connection with November 9th, symbolized here with the word number and numbered? Because does that happen? I mean, Odilio and Stephen go there, present all these symbolic numbers. I'm there November 9th. I present the number 273 and its connection to July 18th. So maybe that has something to do with it. That's a possibility. But, so they're going to number them in some way. That's the idea. They're going to find out who's not there. But it's literally not the word numbered. It's the word, which means to visit, right? Or to muster. So it'd be, now it says that it can be numbered if it's in there's the Hithpaal form or the Hothpaal form. And this word, I'm just going to look up the form of it. See, look at the word. So maybe it is numbered if it's in that form. Okay. Let's see, strange form. Okay. Well, it's definitely not in. Oh, that's why I'm looking at there's two different times that word shows up in the verse. So the first time he says number, that's the imperative form. So like a command. And then the second time it's so it's in the verb form, it's just third person masculine plural, imperfect. And it does mean numbered. So they do number them. So that is correct. So when it says number now, it's just a command to visit, like literally, or muster them, right? And when they had been numbered, right? So basically, he's first calling them to gather them together, everybody together. And then the second time he says to number them. Okay. So the first number is the word muster. The second one is used in the sense of numbering because it's in a different form. Does that make sense? I know it's a little technical. Now, what about Jonathan and his armor bearer were not there when they had numbered?
It looks to me like they took the names of all that were in the army, so they knew exactly who was missing when they recounted.
But if we're going to apply it to our history, and Jeff is going to begin this mustering together and numbering, he's going to pick up the July 18, 2020 date in that history. So after this confrontation with Parminder's group, right? Jeff isn't teaching July 18th on September 7th, is he? 2019. But he's going to number, he's going to muster, right? And then he's going to attribute this victory to Jonathan and his armor bearer, to this message of July 18th. And then, and we'll look at this tomorrow, the next verse. And Saul said unto Ahiah, bring hither the ark of God. For the ark of God was at that time with the children of Israel. So we know the ark has the two tables. And so we might argue that, this has to do with this examination that's going on and going back to the old paths and retracing our steps, so to speak, in connection with November 9th. And then picking up on July 18th. So are we satisfied sort of just as a general sense that this is fitting into this history? Anybody?
In a general sense, but let's take a little deeper look at this when we return tomorrow.
Yeah, there's still a lot more to look at. So we're just trying to get the basic sense. Okay, so let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for the time that we've had here again this morning. And Lord, when we look at our history in your word and recognize our experiences were recorded in symbolic ways long before we were born, we stand in awe of your care for us. We know, Lord, that we can be very discouraged in this world as we look around us and we experience the trials, that some of which are our own doing and some which are from the enemy, and some, of course, all of which are allowed by your hand to show us our true need of you. We just pray, Lord, that we can trust and depend upon you. Help us to live moment by moment, day by day, and to have this hope, to hold on to that hope that is by faith, to trust that you will continue to work in spite of what we see. Be with each person. May your angels watch over them. May you guide and direct our steps. And bring us together again to study your word is our prayer. In Jesus' name, amen.